Laptops. In this nugget, we talk about laptops, and we talk about a lot of the various peripherals and hardware that go along with laptops. So, for example, we'll talk about removing various types of devices, in particular USB drives, but the things that I'll show you there can also apply to PC cards, for example. And then we'll also take a look at video and monitor characteristics so that you can know some things specific to laptop monitors. And then we'll also address some of the input devices. Now, most of the input devices could also be plugged into a normal PC, but they might have some specific characteristics relating to laptop computers. Or you might need to know how to plug in a hardware, a keyboard, and a mouse when a laptop only has maybe one USB port. Well, how do you account for the other device? So we'll address that, as well as preventive maintenance. You want to make sure that you take care of that laptop, of course, and laptops take a beating, so we need to make sure that whenever we move them or transport them, that we appropriately take care of them. So as we look at peripherals and hardware relating to laptops, let's first of all start off by talking about port replicators and docking stations. Now, a port replicator is kind of a subset of what a docking station can be, so I'll start small here and go with this. Now, a port replicator simply does what the name implies. It replicates the existing ports on my laptop. My USB ports, my parallel port, my serial port, my VGA external monitor port. Well, those types of ports are going to be just duplicated on that device. Now, if I have already got all that stuff on my laptop, why do I need to duplicate it? Isn't that kind of repetitious? Really, it's a matter of convenience. You see, if I come home from a trip and I put my laptop down on my desk, I don't want to have to chase down the cable to the end of my external keyboard. I don't want to chase down my cable, my USB cable for my trackball or my mouse, and then to chase down the parallel port for my printer, and then to chase down the VGA cable that goes to my monitor. You see where I'm going with this? It takes a lot of work and effort just to chase all that stuff down and plug it all into the laptop until I'm finally back in business. Well, a port replicator, you leave all that stuff plugged in, not to the laptop, but to the port replicator instead, and then when you bring your laptop in, you just place it down on top of the port replicator, and through the bottom of the laptop, it makes connections to that replicator, and you get access to all those devices I've talked about. Now here I've gone to Sony's website, and they have here a port replicator, and I'm just going to enlarge this real quickly here. I guess I better allow my pop-ups. But once I click on this item, we'll see just kind of an enlarged view. Here's a place where this connection, this port connection, makes a special proprietary connection to the bottom of your laptop. So just set your laptop down on top of this, and these are the kinds of the things that it offers you. Number one, it can charge your battery while it's plugged in. There are contacts on that special port connection that allows it to charge your battery, and you have 3 USB ports, so you can just leave plugged in your external keyboard and mouse, for example. You can be plugged into the network immediately when you plug that laptop into the port replicator. You don't have to chase down a patch cable for yourself. VGA output, printer compatible, and so forth. So you see the idea there. You really just get all of the ports that you wouldn't have been able to have otherwise. Now, let's also take a look at a docking station. A docking station does everything a port replicator does and a little bit more too. Now, my docking station, like I said, does everything a port replicator does, but it also adds a few additional items, and here's some of the things that it includes. It's gonna again get the same things that I would have had otherwise. Then I also have headphone out. It adds some additional features, S-video out, for example, RCA video out, a few different kinds of outs, that is. Also includes a multifunction docking station multifunction bay. So you get additional ability to swap out more peripherals, such as an additional DVD-RW kind of an idea. So you see some other ideas that we could possibly have here as well. Another one that sometimes people like are these 80 gigabyte hard drive bay units, so they can come back to the office and upload or download some additional data to and from that external storage. And then for your visual reference, here's an example of a docking station port on the bottom of a laptop. You just slide the door back usually, and then this goes right on top of your docking station or your port replicator, makes the connections, and through these contacts that you see right along here, and then it can supply power through these larger contacts here, and that's pretty much it. Now you're charging your battery, and you're accessing all your peripherals. By the way, just for fun, I found something yesterday that I thought would be really fun to add to your USB ports, maybe if you are connected with one of these docking stations while you're in the office. Maybe I go to the cooler or go to the refrigerator, pull out an ice cold Coca-Cola or something like that, come back to my desk, and I get carried away with what I'm doing and don't realize that it gets warm and just kind of ruined. so it's not really that nice anymore. Well, look at this. You can actually have this device. This plugs into your USB port on any laptop or desktop computer, or your port replicator or docking station, and it keeps your drinks cool. That's right. I think it cools it down to like 45 degrees or something. I found this at www.coolingitsystems.com. I think it's $25, something like that. I may actually spring for this thing. It looks like a really good idea, especially when it gets scorching hot here in Phoenix. And then there's the media accessory bay, which I kind of already alluded to. This is something that can appear in the docking station or actually in the laptop itself. And let's say that you don't really need your floppy drive that's on your laptop or your docking station. Well, you can pop that out. Usually there's some kind of a lever or a button or a latch that you release and pull out the device that you don't want, and instead you plug back in something you do want, like an additional DVD drive or burner, or you might put in, again, one of those additional hard drives to give yourself some more storage. So that's what these media accessory bays here are. And then for expansion slots, they became necessary because, of course, with a desktop computer, you're going to get more expansion or more features than you would get on most laptop computers, although that is becoming less and less true these days because we're able to fit a lot more on laptops than we used to. But regardless, as a general rule, because of the portability of the laptop, it just didn't have the room for all of the stuff you could have on a desktop, but we still wanted some of that stuff. Especially with the older laptops, most of the time they did not come with a network card, for example. They usually did not come with a modem. So you would have to get what we call a PCMCIA card, and then there would be a small, almost credit card-sized device that you'd slip into a slot on the side of the laptop, and it would give you that additional functionality of a network card, of a modem. Or sometimes now I've also seen these, that at the card bus level will have external serial ATA port connections so that you can add additional storage. You can also get additional PCMCIA cards that will add things like USB ports or FireWire functionality and the like. But almost all of those things that I just mentioned, except for the external storage, we really already have on laptops that are being purchased today. So the need for this is becoming less and less required. And in fact, it used to be that you would have space on laptops for 2 PCMCIA cards. Nowadays, most of the time, there's really only room for 1. Now, the A+ exam objectives call on us to know about PCMCIA. This is a little bit dated. I was surprised it showed up on the 2006 exam objectives for them to use this term. We still use what this actually is, just not in this term so much, because it was kind of a convoluted older term that people can't really remember much. And what it stands for is Personal Computer Memory Card International Association. And that was just a long acronym. Well, people kind of jokingly but realistically refer to this more as people can't memorize computer industry acronyms. And who cares what it stands for? Nowadays, though, just to make it roll off the tongue a little bit easier, most people and most industry standards will now call this PC card instead, just because this is a hassle. Now, regardless, the PCMCIA standard did involve 3 different standards. There was the first standard, which is really mostly for memory expansion. Then we had the second standard, and that was useful for additional devices such as network cards, modems, and other things that we could use, additional ports and the like. And then there's also a third standard here now, which increases the bus bandwidth to 32 bits and the speed from 8 megahertz to 33 megahertz. And then there are even new card bus adapters used now that give us PCI-like kind of access methods in the design of them, and that gives us a throughput that's capable of up to 132 megabits per second. Now, in my humble opinion, I'm not so sure CompTIA should have included PCMCIA different versions on the exam objectives. This is more or less kind of trivia knowledge. It doesn't really help us that much. What really does help us in a practical implementation, however, is whether or not we have type 1, 2, and 3. Now, by coincidence, these are all 1, 2, and 3 for PCMCIA versions, and type 1, 2, and 3 here as well for the form factors of the cards. I think that people get these confused very often, and they shouldn't. They are different things. First, let's talk about type 1. This will be a card that's only 3.3 millimeters thick. Otherwise, it's about the size of a credit card, and it has a single row of of pins that it can accept. And then the Type 2 is going to be about 5 millimeters thick, and it has 2 rows of pins. Then this one here, the Type 3, is going to be 10.5 millimeters thick, and it has 4 rows of pins. The most common one that you'll see out there is Type 2. In fact, most laptops right now only have a Type 2 expansion slot on them. I haven't seen a Type 3 in quite a long time. It used to be that we would have 2 Type 2 slots in a lot of the laptops. We don't really have those anymore because the laptops pretty much have everything you need, and we realized we didn't really need that much more additional expansion anyway, so now usually you just have one Type 2 slot. Now for your visual reference for these types of cards, here I have an example of a card. This is a PC card, and it's going to be a Type 2 card. And how do I know that? Because if I close this one out and look at a different one, let's see, it's this one right here, then I look at the end of it where I've turned it over on the side, we see 2 rows of pins designating this as a Type 2 card. And then here we have card bus and express bus. Remember, card bus is where you're going to get the additional performance out of your PC cards. That's what's going to give you up to 132 megabits per second. And then our express bus is what we can do to get further expansion. So, for example, when a lot of the early laptops came out, they only had a single USB port. Everybody thought USB was great, but hey, I only have one port to work with here. So what we would do is we had these USB hubs that would come out, and on one side of the hub there'd be 4 or 7 USB ports on it. The other side would plug into the USB port on the computer, and by doing this I've expanded from a single USB port on my computer. Well, it could be a laptop or a desktop, really. And then now I've got 4 or 7 or more USB connections on the outside of that. Now, that means that since it's all coming through one port on my laptop in this case, that all those ports are sharing the bandwidth capability of that one port. So if I've got a lot of different devices at once competing for attention or competing for bandwidth, then it's going to have to be split up between all of them. And then we also have mini PCI. You see, once again, my desktop computers get the full functionality of PCI, but a lot of the earlier laptops didn't get some of the additional benefits that we could have otherwise had. So what was invented was the mini PCI connection, which gives you most of the same functions as PCI version 2.2, and that means it's going to be 32 bits wide, it's going to be 33 megahertz bus, it requires 3.3 volts of power, and it also supports bus mastering and direct memory access. So mini PCI was actually a pretty good idea. Let me show you an example. Here I've got a mini PCI card looking inside of my laptop here. It installs a lot like your SODIMMs would, or your single outline memory modules would. You got these latches on the side. It's got a notch in the side of the card that you lay down into this and locks it into place. This particular device we're looking at is a modem that adds modem capabilities, of course, to my laptop. And then it also installs, much like that SODIMM memory here as well, in that there are contacts down at the bottom. You press down into it. It's also notched. It's notched differently than conventional memory, of course, so you don't actually mix these things up. And then you're pretty much in business. Just put it in there and close the door. Now, most of the time, these are also pre-installed, and the laptop already includes the modem or whatever it is already installed. Now we can only see part of it here, but over to the right there may be additional dip switches which enable or disable certain kinds of functionality on the PCI card. Again, most of the time from the factory, those are already pre-configured properly. And then for sake of reference, let's take a look at the bottom of my laptop here. Here's where my memory goes in. Here's where my hard drive goes in. I've pulled it out in this picture. This is where my port replicator would be. I guess I forgot to slide the cover, but you saw that earlier. We just slide that back. And then over here again is my mini PCI slot with the card already in it. Next, let's go ahead and talk about removing devices from a laptop. Now here I'm using my daughter's laptop because mine's running Windows Vista, which is not part of the exam objectives. So she's running Windows XP here. Obviously, I do what many dads do, and I give my kids the leftovers. I give them the old antiquated stuff. Anyway, you can kind of see what her priorities are by looking over at the desktop. But if I go into this thing, I want to show you what I can do about safely removing hardware. And right now, I've just plugged in a USB flash drive, which has a couple of driver files on it. And I might get a message down at the bottom that says that the USB device can perform faster if I connect it to a high-speed USB 2.0 port. You'll get that if the USB technology in this computer is the older 1.1 version of USB. Now, you'll also notice that I get this icon. It's really small, so I know it's hard to see, but there's no way to really make it bigger. It's this kind of remove item. It's the safely remove hardware icon. Now, let me explain a little bit about why we get that and why I just got this window up here. The flash drive has these two files on it, which just kind of seem to have magically appeared out of nowhere. Why did they do that? If you don't have any autoplay file on a flash drive, just like you have autoplay on CDs at times or DVDs, then it will just open up the contents of whatever's on that drive. Now, I'm going to go ahead and show you some things about this that make a difference between whether or not you have to use the safely remove hardware item or not. I'm just going to go to my computer here, and I'll go to the properties of this removable disk, and then I'll go to the hardware tab, and then I'll go to the properties tab of this USB flash drive. Okay, so go into properties here, clean up a little bit. Then we see that there's a policies tab, and this is where everything relates to whether or not you have to use the safely remove hardware icon. And to illustrate this, let me first go to this option and talk about this. This says optimize for performance, which means that it's going to enable write caching in Windows to improve disk performance, as you can read there. And what that means is that this is going to treat this the same way it treats my internal fixed disks in my computer. You see, by default, Windows, when you want to write data to the disk, Windows will kind of put that data on pause, and it'll just hold it in a holding area in memory, just of course known as cache, and then it will say, I'm going to wait until that disk is not too busy, and then when it's not too busy, I'm going to flush the data from cache onto the disk, and that gives you, the user, a perceived performance increase. Because if you're trying to write data to that disk at a time when it's really busy, then it's going to give you an overall slowdown. And whatever else is going on with that disk and the write to that disk is both going to be noticeably slower than it would have otherwise been. So USB devices like this flash drive have optimized for quick removal as the default behavior. With this one, write caching is disabled, and the data goes immediately from whatever the program is that's trying to transfer the data directly to that disk without any caching in between. And because of this, rarely do we have to use the safely remove hardware wizard anymore. Just mostly everything that I plug in through USB or FireWire or whatever else, rarely do I ever have to use that safely remove hardware item. Now, in the older days of Windows 9X and past versions of Windows with older hardware, a lot of times we were having to use that safely remove hardware icon. A+ exam still requires it, but the truth of the matter is we really don't need it like we used to in the past. But if I did want to use this, how would I do that? Well, I'd go down to this safely remove hardware item, and I can click on it with a left click, and it shows me the safely remove USB mass storage device. I can use it if I want to, even if I don't absolutely have to. But when I choose this option and I select it like I did just now, then I'll get a message that says the device can now be safely removed from the system. What is that telling me? That tells me that if there was anything in the cache at the time I ran that just now, then it will have forcibly flushed anything from the cache onto that drive to make it safe to remove from the system without losing any data. Now let's also take a look at your monitor. With your monitor, there are going to be LCD monitors for laptops, but they could be either active or passive matrix. And what's the difference between the two? First of all, the active is going to require more power because each pixel has its own transistor. And in order to be able to charge all the transistors that need to be on, it's going to take more electricity. Whereas the passive matrix has two rows of transistors, one at X coordinates and one at Y coordinates. And whenever the computer's video circuit wants to turn on a pixel, it sends a signal to the X and the Y coordinate transistors for that individual pixel, and then it turns them on. Because of that, it's going to be more friendly for the electrical purposes. It's going to get longer battery life out of these passive types, but the picture quality usually is not as good. And it can also cause an effect of something called submarining, which is where if I take my mouse pointer here and I quickly go down to this diagonal down over here, then you don't see it kind of going across the screen like this. It just appears here, and then it kind of submarines, meaning like it goes underwater. You don't see it at all in this middle section until I stop it on the other side, and then it suddenly kind of pops up, just like a submarine pops up on the other side of a destination. And most laptops are going to be active matrix monitors. They do require more power, but people like that good picture quality, so that's what they give them. The LCD cutoff switch really is the same thing that I discussed to you in a previous nugget, where you can use the function key and then some F key to be able to turn on or off the backlight to your particular LCD monitor. Now that can have a couple of different purposes, especially, again, if I add an external monitor or a projector, then I have three settings primarily. Number one, using the function key and that F key, I can go ahead and turn off my local LCD monitor. or I can turn on the projector or external monitor, or the third setting is I can turn both of them on at one time. And that's typically what we want to do when we're making a presentation or something. So to illustrate that here, I've gone to the Fn key on this keyboard, and I can hold that down and then press F4, but again, it's different for different brands. It might be F4, F5, F8, something. And when I do that, holding that down and pressing this key, then it will cycle to one thing. It might cycle off the local monitor and cycle on the projector. Or it might cycle off the projector and on the local LCD monitor, or it might, again, light up both of those. Now, sometimes on your monitor, you'll look at it, and you might have a white page, kind of like I've got here, and yet there's this black dot right here or something like that. I know it's blue, but work with me, people. Just one black dot there, and if you look real close, it's just one pixel that's black. That's what we call a bad pixel. This is part of the manufacturing process for LCD monitors. It's difficult to get them exactly perfect for every single pixels. I mean, we got quite a few here. I mean, at 1028 by 768, what's that? That's 789,504 pixels. I don't know. I said that as if I just thought of it in my head, but I actually had to calculate it and write it down. I hope you were impressed, nevertheless. And then most manufacturers will only warranty up to 99.999% of their pixels, so that you'd have to have about 8 of them go bad before it would qualify for replacement or warranty service. And then some manufacturers are worse than that. They only warranty 99.99% of the pixels, and that means that there could be 79 pixels that would be bad before they'd have to replace the display. Let's also talk here about video memory. Of course, your laptop has its own video card in there, and it's going to be a miniaturized size of a video card because, again, they have to pack a lot of stuff on that little tiny form factor. As a result, it's not going to have as much room for memory as a desktop PCI type of a card or AGP or PCI Express card would otherwise have. So what a lot of times the manufacturers will do is they'll say, hey, we need to borrow some memory from the main system memory, in other words, from your main RAM. So they'll use the video card for all of the technology that it has and the capabilities that it has, but anytime it needs memory, it carves out a chunk of your main RAM memory and it uses that for video instead. That might be okay. Just understand that it could cause a system slowdown because it might be borrowing memory that you could not otherwise afford, especially if you already have a low amount of RAM. And also, as it relates to cleaning, we talked about that in a previous nugget, but just briefly, remember, for LCD screens, generally if you use just a damp cloth, a soft cloth, then you're going to be pretty much okay. Do not ever use an ammonia-based cleaner, and if you do have any kind of a spray-based cleaner that you use that's safe for the LCD, don't spray directly onto the monitor, spray onto the soft cloth, because if you spray on the monitor and it forms a droplet that could go under the bezel, it could contact electrical components underneath that bezel and fry the monitor. And in brief, let's go ahead and address some of these input devices, such as a stylus that you might use with something like a tablet PC. You can also use these with those handheld PCs as well, like a pocket PC or a Palm device. These are usually just small, long, slender items that are going to be used kind of in the same way that you would use a pen or a pointer of some kind. And then you'll have a touchpad as well. And if I go back to my picture, you'll see here that we have one of those touch pads here, and it's sensitive in such a way that just by running your finger along it, then it can identify where you're trying to go to on the screen. And then the buttons here are for left and right mouse clicks, and you can also do a similar function if you were to, for example, in clicking on something, you can also tap and hold onto something, and then you can drag it around, and you can also double click by double tapping on this pad as opposed to using this. Just mostly a matter of preference. You might have also heard of track points or point sticks, and this is going to be something that's about the size of a small eraser located on the keyboard between the G and the H keys somewhere. And usually you will find those on IBM systems, but some of the older Toshibas as well, and use that by applying pressure in a specific direction, and that would move the mouse pointer around. You might also have a trackball. Now, this is a picture of a trackball right here from Logitech, and instead of having the ball on the bottom of the mouse and you move the mouse around, you simply rotate this ball around. That's actually what I'm using right now for just my matter of preference. That's what I like to use for all of my pointers. Now, for a laptop, you can get kind of miniaturized size items like this. This size one, your hand would pretty much fit over the entire thing. Some of the really small ones for laptops will be really tiny. I've seen some that even clip onto the side of the laptop, and then they're easily portable that way, and they don't take up a lot of space in your laptop bag. Now, especially if you get a docking station, you might also want an external keyboard and or an external mouse. This can be done a couple of different ways, of course, through the docking station itself, or if you want to plug it into the laptop itself, most keyboards and mice that we're buying nowadays are USB already, so that's a pretty easy solution. Alternatively, if you're using PS2 keyboard and mouse, you might be able to use something like this, where you can see where there's a connector for both the keyboard and the mouse here, the mouse one being the green one. And you just plug it into there, but then you plug the other end of this into a USB port, and it will be able to detect both the keyboard and the mouse, and you can just use them as usual. Also, if you have an even older system, or you don't have an available USB port, there's things that look exactly like this, except for on the end of this, there's another PS2 connection that you plug into the PS2 port on the laptop, and then it will still be able to read both the keyboard and the mouse separately. As it relates to laptop keypad issues, you can do normal maintenance using compressed air to blow out the dirt and dust and so forth that appears underneath the keys. You might not want to apply full or direct pressure so that you don't blow stuff into the laptop even deeper, but you just want to use the main objective of getting it out. And then I've gone back here to this particular graphic where I've zoomed in a little bit further to show us some other functions that appear here. Now remember, we have our function key over here. It's going to be different in all different laptops, different brands, but you hold that down and you can usually use one of these items up here. For example, this one turns on and off the wireless network, suspend, change to different monitors or projectors like we've discussed before. Here's one that's very useful. I can adjust up or down the brightness of the LCD monitor's backlight. Of course, I would adjust it down if I wanted to conserve battery power, so that can be very useful, especially on long trips. I can just make it as dim as I possibly can while still seeing stuff. And then I can have multimedia keys here for play, stop, fast forward, and reverse, for example, or skip ahead and back. And then also I have a numlock item right over here. Now, what in the world is that about? Notice that if I look at these keys here, then I see the 7, 8, 9, and 0. That's what I would expect to see as usual. But I also have numbers that appear on these keys as well. Well, on a laptop, I don't have the keypad over on the right-hand side that you do on desktops that has just the numbers, and then it has, page up, page down, numlock, and all that kind of stuff. Well, here, if I hold down the function key that appears on the lower left of this keyboard and press this, it turns on the numlock, which is very handy. If I'm especially going to be entering a lot of numbers at once, maybe I'm an accountant, and my main function right now is just, tap, 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 enter in a whole bunch of numbers. The other thing I've seen with this, however, is that sometimes a laptop will go into suspend or hibernate, and then when you resume that computer, and it'll frequently ask you to put in your password to confirm that you are who you say you are. When you try to do that, your password doesn't work. And why would that be? Some reason I've seen laptops, for some reason, after they resume, they lock on the numlock thing here. So you're typing in a password that uses some of these characters over here, and instead it's actually using one of these numbers. So just keep that in mind. And you might need to toggle that off in order to get it to work. And then finally, you might also have a drawing tablet or a drawing pad, and it's exactly what I'm using to do all this whiteboard work, and you might know that I use this to do my excellent artwork that I know you've all been able to enjoy from time to time. My little Van Gogh work there, apparently, but this is the device that I'm actually using right here, and I hold this pen in my hand, and that's what I use to draw around different things and so forth. And then this pen, I've mentioned before that it's electronic. It's really not electronic on its own. It doesn't have a battery in it or something like that, but there's a sensitivity in this pad to this pen, and so that it's able to detect wherever I move my mouse pointer around, which is what I'm doing with it right now. And a lot of graphic artists and photographers use this kind of a thing. In fact, that's what I use for all of my Photoshop work. Although don't tell CBT Nuggets that, because I'm supposed to be using this thing strictly for business purposes. But you might also see something like this for draftsmen, engineers, architects. They have a similar kind of a thing, except that it'll often have a grid or other kind of a legend on it that they can use as guidelines. And it'll have a mouse on here as well that they hover over the top of this thing, that they slide across the top, that has crosshairs in it that are very useful for being very exacting in their schematics and diagrams and so forth. And then we also have preventive maintenance that we need to address. One of the first ones, and the most important there, is going to be cooling. So for example, my daughter, I showed you her laptop just a little while ago. That laptop earlier, she had it up in her room a couple of weeks ago, and I went up there to look, and the thing was extremely hot while she had a stuffed animal along the back side of it where the fan blows out all the hot air. And I had to tell her, I had to educate her a little bit. And I said, hey, honey, you can't just put this up against any kind of clothes or anything that's going to block that cooling fan because it's going to burn up. And hopefully we won't run into this situation where you have this type of thing going on. This wasn't actually because someone blocked the fan, but as you may know, a lot of those lithium-ion batteries that appear in laptops these days are overheating or exploding, and some are even catching on fire like you see here. So as a safety matter, by the way, it's not an A+ objective, but as a safety matter, you might want to check with your manufacturer to see if your battery is safe. A lot of those are being replaced free, even if they're no longer under warranty, so check carefully with that. And then here you may have seen devices like this as well. This is a notebook cooler. Notice that it has kind of a ventilation system in it. It has a couple of little low power fans. It's powered by your USB port, so it may drain battery power a little bit. But you can use it to go ahead and help to keep your laptop cool. I know a lot of laptops on the bottom of them, you can barely keep them on your lap because, man, they just get pretty hot. Especially if you're in the summer already, and especially if you're in Phoenix, Arizona. It's already hot down here. Then as far as storage is concerned, you might want to go ahead and take the battery out of the laptop if you plan to store it for an extended period of time for a couple of reasons. Number one, if you're in a humid area, a lot of times the contact between the battery and the contacts underneath the laptop could develop a corrosion between them. It's unlikely, but it could possibly happen, so you might as well be safe. And then more likely is, you remember that picture I showed you just a moment ago with the burned out laptop? Well, a lot of these batteries are starting to develop problems, especially some of those manufactured by Sony. I've also seen some batteries from a Macintosh that strangely started to swell as if there was a liquid inside of them. I've been told that it's actually kind of an internal fire that never made it outside of the compartment, but they're just kind of like looks like they're in these foil bags and they just expand and emit a foul odor, could explode or catch on fire. So you don't want to store your batteries with the laptop for extended periods of time where that could happen. So that if they exploded or if they caught on fire, they wouldn't at least total the entire laptop. And then also, someone has at times recommended, and this is probably a good tip, that you only store the lithium-ion batteries with about 40% of the charge, somewhere around that range. That way they don't store a highly volatile charge that could be more susceptible to exploding or catching on fire. And it's also been stated that it's better for the battery life to store it at about a 40% charge. And then when it comes time to take the laptop somewhere and transport it, make sure you have a laptop case with suitable padding that will adequately protect it. Now, you don't just throw it in a duffel bag and I don't mean you, I mean your customers. This is what you'll want to advise them of. Or into a backpack that's unpadded and so forth. Also, as they transport it, make sure that they don't have an undue amount of pressure on it. Sometimes people pack things too tight or put things on top of their laptop, and it could be that they put too much pressure on the screen so that it comes into contact with the keyboard or other surfaces on the top of that laptop. I have seen some screens that actually have indentations from the keyboard on the screen, so it's not really a good idea to put too much pressure on there. I want to avoid that. Also, when it comes time to ship it, if possible, ship it back to the manufacturer if it's got warranty service or something in its original container with its original styrofoam. Usually they're kind of T-shaped types of styrofoam where you just slip the ends of the laptop in, and then there's lots of air around all the outside. And this again helps to avoid crushing effects on that laptop. If you don't have that kind of packaging, I know a lot of shops will eventually accumulate a few of those extra foam core packages that go along the outside. They're not quite universal in shape and size, but they're close enough, and you can add a little bit of protection when you ship these devices and these laptops. Now, here I've got an exploded view of a laptop, and this is coming from a service manual for Compaq. Now, Compaq and many other manufacturers don't make these kinds of documents readily available to the general public. It might only be available in a certain authorized service center portion of their website or an FTP site. A lot of times, if you dig around and you're really persistent, you can find this stuff somewhere. Or if you can't find it directly on their site, you can go to eserviceinfo.com, and for about $20, you can download a lot of these. And I thought I found this. I searched against one of my other laptops, and sure enough, there's a repair manual for it. So I could download that particular manual. But the reason why this is very useful is because laptops are very proprietary. They don't all assemble and disassemble the same way. It's not like a PC where almost common sense will allow you to take things apart and put them back together. Here, there's a lot of interlocking parts, and you have to take off one part before the other one will be released. And then that's easy when you take it apart, but when you put it back together, that's the hard part in terms of determining where stuff is supposed to go back. So once again, this kind of manual is very useful if you can find it. Now, another thing I like about this is it gives you a screw listing. Let's go ahead and take a look at this. You go down into here, and let me shrink this up a little bit so we can see more. You go down into this, and you'll find that, man, you've got a whole bunch of screws all over the place if you start to disassemble these things. And the difficult part is you're not sure where the screws came from. You got a little cup there full of different size screws. You're not sure what goes where. This can be a real problem, especially because some of the screws look almost identical, but some are just slightly longer than others. And that's because the short screws are designed not to come into contact with electrical components in many places. So if you accidentally put a longer screw where a shorter screw is supposed to go, you could contact the motherboard or something else that's not supposed to be in contact and short out or otherwise ruin that laptop. So make sure you put the screws in the right place or else, well, you'll be screwed. In this nugget, we talked about laptops, and we talked about the various peripherals and hardware accompanying laptops, such as when you can safely remove a device without using the safely remove hardware item down in the notification area. Remember, caching has something to do with that, and you can also use that same item to remove things such as PC cards to make sure that they're safely removed as well. And then we also addressed video and monitor issues and how to properly maintain and take care of those items, and input devices such as the tablet and pen device that I'm using for our videos here. We took a look also at preventive maintenance. Remember that if you transport those devices and those laptops, that you can use that non-conductive foam, which is almost universal in size, and make sure that it's well packaged and well boxed. And also for your laptop transportation on business, make sure that it's stored in a suitable container like a laptop-specific case with specific padding for it. And of course, that seems like common sense to you and me, but a lot of times you'll find out that your customers don't have that much common sense. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.